on screen for Baroness Martha Lane Fox.
Hi, bonjour. Well, you'll be relieved to hear that's where the French will end. I'm actually at a Chanel board meeting, a company that's doing some fantastically interesting things around the climate. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about what's been front of mind since I was thrilled enough to become president of the Chambers Network, and some of the things that I've heard from the businesses that are in the network, and some of the incredible ways that the world is changing because of the entrepreneurship that I'm lucky enough to see going on around in my travels. You know, I've had a funny kind of life. I have started businesses, I have worked in government, and I've worked in the charitable sector. It's quite hard to put me in a box. But I think one of the biggest shifts that I have seen in my working career is the incredible tightening of the relationship between profit and purpose. And this is an incredible and powerful shift, and one that was certainly not front of mind when we started our business in 1997, lastminute.com. You know, at that, getting incredibly overexcited about the internet. They were really thinking that this was going to be a huge power shift for the world, that more people that looked a bit like me and a fewer people that had traditionally started businesses would be enabled to do so using the incredible powers of technology. And it was an exciting and inspiring time to be building a business, even though no one really believed lastminute.com was going to be successful, and we had to spend all our time convincing people that the internet was not going to blow up. But now the world is so wildly different, and I really don't believe that you are going to have a successful business in the next 10 years. Forget the targets, the net zero ambitions and so on. I don't believe you'll have a business if you don't show your customers, your employees, your suppliers, all of the stakeholders in your business that you are contributing in a positive way towards the future of our planet. What an immense shift. You know, I was responsible for building a business that we were sending people around the world on cheap flights. And I look back now, and yes, maybe I was only 25, but my goodness me, it never even occurred to us to think about whether or not more short-haul travel by air was going to be a good thing. Never even occurred to us to think about what all of this extra carbon into the atmosphere was doing to the world. That's how quickly we've changed. And yes, I know we haven't changed quickly enough, and we have a massive, huge, enormous hurdle to jump through in order to make sure that the planet is habitable over the next 100 years. But it is still incredible to me that the conversation is so alive, and that incredible networks such as the Glasgow Chambers, where you all are today, is front and centre of how you think about the contributions that you want to make. You know, when I think back to one of the key products in lastminute.com that made the website fly, it was a £99 flight to New York. God bless Haldor Haldorson, who I must have called about 700 times on his mobile phone. He was the sales director in the UK for Iceland Air. I don't think he'd ever had so much attention. He had no idea what was hitting him as the Lane Fox train rolled over him, convincing him that it would be a good idea to give us a £99 flight to New York via Reykjavik. But now I think that if I was starting a business, I would be in a very different state of mind. I'd be thinking carefully about what our responsibility was as that business. I'd be looking into becoming a B Corp. I'd be really thinking carefully about how to represent us to our employees, to our board, to our stakeholders, to our investors. Because the urgency is now upon all of us to do more in order to address the climate catastrophe. Now, I am not expert in climate technologies, and just listening to the end of Thomasina's remarks just then, hello Thomasina, I realised how little I know really about the technical changes that we need to make, and that's just in food. You know, if you layer across all of the different axes from which we need to think about the climate, then I feel very, very ill-educated indeed. But that actually, to me, is part of the point. Everybody, in my opinion, now has to use their voice to think about how we can address the mammoth challenges ahead of us. And I take some comfort from two things. Firstly, the incredible power of entrepreneurship, and secondly, the incredible power of collaboration. So if I just turn to entrepreneurship to begin with, I'm pretty lucky. I've never really had a proper job. I had one at the beginning of my career. I lasted about 3 years and then that was it. I've never really had a proper one since. So I'm always been in joyous, sometimes stressful, but mainly joyous position of starting things of my own or running things of my own. And it's this innate belief that you can always have agency to change things that has fueled most of my own personal work. And it's what I see again and again when I'm both travelling around the chambers in the UK and around talking to chambers around the world, but also just more broadly if I look in the business landscape. There are so many problems. There are so many small things that people have ideas about, so many big things that people have ideas about. You don't just have to be an entrepreneur and want to start your own business to feel as though you can have the power to do something about them. So that's the first point I really want to keep reinforcing, not just to you here today, but in the work that I do over the next decade. That even if you're not the entrepreneur that might be inventing this amazing new solution to hydrogen or some clever nuclear data set that's going to help people use nuclear more effective, everyone can be entrepreneurial in how they're thinking in their own roles and how they're thinking about the things that we're going to focus on over the next decade. We all have agency. We all have the ability to ask questions, to spot things that might not be going quite right, to challenge the people around us, and if we see things that are wrong, to try and address them and bring people on the journey with us. I see that at Chanel, where I am today. You might think, what on earth am I doing? Why am I on the board of this amazing luxury business? I don't even get any free handbags. I'm on the board because Chanel sits at a really interesting juxtaposition between countries, the enormous shift from its markets in Europe and the West to the East, and also fundamentally at a very important intersection around how luxury can address the climate crisis. And the work that goes on in this company to think carefully about the whole supply chain, not only just in terms of bringing it back to net zero, but bringing it back to responsibility, diversity and sustainability is really quite remarkable. And I mentioned Chanel because Chanel is a 100-year-old organisation with actually still a very strong French and a very strong founder-led culture. And yet the people here feel extremely empowered and entrepreneurial to try and think about new ways of doing things, to open source designs, to think about the circular economy, to imagine what the future of luxury is going to be like in 10 years' time. So I would definitely hazard a guess that if Chanel, this old, incredibly well-crafted, beautiful, careful private company, can push so hard towards sustainability targets, then any organisation in the world can feel entrepreneurial to do the same thing. And I'm lucky enough that I've met entrepreneurs both through the chamber network, and there are so many chambers all over the country doing interesting things and working on interesting projects to help build the environmental resilience that we need in this country. But there are also individual entrepreneurs doing incredible things. I was really impressed by a young woman who started a business called Biocarbon Engineering. She takes walnut shells and she uses them to both sequester carbon and also to create new sources of energy from walnut shells. She's building huge factories and she blows apart so many stereotypes about entrepreneurs. She's a young woman, she's doing it in a sector where you don't see many people like her, and she's doing it in the hard area of kind of supply chain management and energy resources. There are so many people doing remarkable things all across our country and in the wider world beyond. So never give up on the thinking of entrepreneurship. Never give up on being and acting like an entrepreneur, even if you're in a more rigid and larger structure. I think it will help us over the next decades. But the second thing, and this is why I really am so thrilled to be the president of the British Chambers, is about the power of collaboration. I have been blown away by the amount of help, resources, the camaraderie, and the strength and resilience that local chambers have, both into their communities, but of course for their members, I'm sure many of you are feeling that today as you are in the room together. You know, whether I've been talking in Edinburgh or Poole or Coventry or Birmingham or Manchester, wherever it might be, the amazing links that the network has between themselves, between the members themselves, but also into the wider community has really blown me away. And that's why, you know, the chamber networks, the local chamber networks are thinking about local problems like education or local problems like the ones you're talking about around net zero and other environmental targets. But what is 100% true is that by talking to each other, by building that strength in networks, we're going to get further and faster than we would otherwise. You know, I am always struck by the trading figures that I see coming from the chamber network. You know, this is sort of a slight tangent to some of the green energy and the net zero targets that we need to meet, but they're all linked. We have so many incredible innovations. We're going to need to share them and we're going to need to spread them. One way to do that is clearly through good international trade. And as I'm sure you're all aware, only 10% of this businesses in this country are trading, but 65% of our chamber network are trading. There's something in that, isn't there? That's a wonderful metric to me, just to show the power and the resilience of being part of a wider group, of working together to solve big problems. And many of the chambers are coming to do that already within the areas of green energy and of the challenges that we face around the climate. I'm thinking particularly around Suffolk Chamber and some of the issues that they're dealing with nuclear, and some of the other chambers that are working on government contracts and sustainability targets. So it's only by working collaboratively that I really think we're going to have a shot, not just in helping us in the UK, but more importantly, putting the UK on the world map and showing what incredible innovation we have here. Wind power and the amazing success we've had in that dimension, how many countries in the world are looking at us and thinking they'd like to learn from us. We need to ramp that up, we need to scale it, and we need to deliver it across not just more of our country, but more countries around the world. That's much easier if we work together to make it possible. Never before, I think, have we had such dramatic and global issues so well understood together. You know, global information flows, whether it's digital-based technologies or just the scale of the geopolitical and the climate catastrophe that we're facing, just mean that we need to think in a more joined up and a more open way than I think we've had to before as humanity. That sounds a bit grand, but I really do think that us as chamber network and us as a chamber network with a strong, strong voice into government will mean that we have a better shot at not only creating a fabulous and resilient UK full of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinking, but also a UK that has a world-class voice and a voice on the world stage, from which to help build solutions that can benefit many countries around the world. You know, I don't underestimate the perilous nature of this moment. When we had our conference last week, it was very interesting to see all these people responsible for our economy, from the Chancellor to the Governor of the Bank of England to Keir Starmer, all of whom were treading this fine line between being realistic about where we're at right now, but also optimistic for our capacity for innovation, our capacity for growth. But we realise it is a fine line, and I'm sure many of you are not feeling quite so optimistic in your own businesses, perhaps, as some of the rhetoric you're hearing. But that's why it's essential we stay collaborative, we stay joined up, and we talk to each other about the things that really matter. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today. I'm sorry I'm not in the room, and I send you many bisous from Paris, and I'd love to take some questions if we have time.
Great. Thank you. Martha, if I may, I hope you can hear the warmth of the applause here in Glasgow, where you're talking to a room of about 200 people who have really enjoyed hearing from you. And I want to begin by saying there are a lot of questions that have come through from the delegates, and if you're happy to do some fairly quickly, that would be good. Could we start with the key question that people are asking, which is, How do you think employees, particularly in larger firms, can influence their senior managers and their boards to reduce flying activities, for example? That's one example, because often at the senior levels, these things are seen as expedient. Is there something that people as workers in large firms can do to influence corporate behaviour?
Good question. I mean, I think whether it's influencing flying around or whether it's influencing other things that you might be thinking have a negative impact on the environment, the answer is always the same, in my opinion. You just have to keep asking the questions, and if it comes to it, you can start using your voice in more dramatic ways. You can always put it into every single appraisal that you have. You can always put it into every single feedback loop you have. You can always raise it in any forum that you have. Don't underestimate the power of the employee voice. It may seem as though sometimes employers aren't listening to employees, but it's also true that right now we're facing a tightening, as everyone knows, of the labour market. Great people are in demand. Use your voice. It's more powerful than you think. And the first way of doing that, in my opinion, is always to ask the questions. Why are you doing this? Have you made the calculation? If you have, can you show us, work a bit more openly and transparently why you're making these kinds of calculations and how the outcomes are? So, I think that's true whether you're talking about corporate flying or whether you're talking about, how much food you may be throwing away from the cafeteria. It might be a whole different spectrum of things, but you have more power than you think, and you should just be using that power in every single moment that you have with interactions with the people around you and your employer.
Thank you very much, Martha. There's another question here that's particularly addressing the sort of luxury and elite industries, and it refers to your comments about Chanel, and it asks, is there a particular kind of sustainability challenge with this industry where you're retailing bags, for example, at £4,000 is the comment here? Does the high fashion lifestyle really line up in the end with net zero end goals? Is there something that needs to be done there?
I think it's a really important question, and I would say two things. I'm less worried about what people will pay for a highly crafted, very, very long-lasting, beautiful Chanel bag. And just to be clear, I don't own any of them. I think the more pressing question, and the one that really is affecting our carbon emissions right now, is about the volume of fast fashion. That's 96% of the world's fashion-based carbon emissions. It's not the luxury end of the market. I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying that we need to make sure that we don't look at the wrong shiny piece of the puzzle, right? So that's the first thing. It's the fast fashion. It's all of us, and I'm guilty of this too, who buy too many things, probably don't recycle and maybe don't give them to charity, aren't doing the right things with them. That is going to make the most dramatic difference. And then I think if you look at the luxury end of the market, and I can't speak to any other companies apart from Chanel, but the thing I've been so impressed with in this business is their absolute commitment to reaching net zero quickly. And you can read all about their targets in their Mission 1.5. And being Chanel and being the kind of incredibly detail-orientated business they are, they have laid out every single thing they're going to do across every axis of their business, from putting chrome in the handbags to the women working on the supply chain in some of the bits of Africa where they source certain products. So I feel reassured that this business is doing the right thing, and hopefully that can pull some of the others into the same place.
Thank you very much, Martha. There's a question now from Miranda Barker that 10 people have preferenced. And her question is, how can we get Glasgow innovators' ideas and technology more onto the global stage, for example, at COP28 and beyond? How do we get the really local innovations that are happening in an incredibly innovative city like Glasgow to be more globally visible?
That's a really important point, isn't it? And one of the things that I find somewhat frustrating is that, when I was talking about that line that you feel our leaders are sometimes treading, and I feel it too, I'm sure many of you here do, which you don't want to talk down our country. You see amazing things happening all the time, but at the same time, we know that we're not doing the best job we can to scale up some of our innovations. We know that we're not achieving the growth that we could. I don't mean to keep throwing it back to the Chamber Network, and I know Siobhan is in the room. Hi, madam. But I really do think that it's through this kind of collaboration that we can surface these innovations representations. Siobhan is there to then take our representations to government to make sure that when we're going to Dubai with the next COP that we know what the best of British really looks and feels like. And, there's never been an easier time to do that in a way because of the strength of the network, but also, and maybe I would say this, because of the strength of digital technologies. You can reach audiences now in a way that was never possible before. I'm always blown away by the power of LinkedIn, just as one example, right? And I say this as an ex-Twitter board member. LinkedIn is just such a rich fabric of businesses wanting ideas, wanting to know what's going on. So that's just one place that you can really make sure you drive your PR and your comms about what's happening in Glasgow. But I think that there are so many people that want to make what you just described happen, us in the Chamber Network, but I'm sure local council activity as well, that I feel confident that we will get better at doing this in this country because there is so much innovation happening.
Thank you very much, Martha. And again, people in the room are nodding as you speak and looking forward to what Siobhan and Stuart are going to say later on. There's another question here that's been proposed by Vicky Morris. Thank you, Vicky. And what Vicky says is, have you any advice for how we influence a board of directors in a firm who may not always see the advantages of investing in innovation without there being a strong, immediate financial return? What's and may view innovation as the right thing to do rather than adding to the bottom line. How do we get boards, senior management teams and others to embrace more innovation more readily?
I think that, boards are funny, aren't they? I mean, I feel like now, it's weird, I was just 50 at the beginning of this year and I never thought that I would have on my CV, like, experienced board director. That was not the plan when I was 25. I thought I'd be doing something totally different. But because of various things that happened in my life, including a catastrophic car accident, I had to kind of rearrange my life into a portfolio. So I have now spent a really weird amount of time on boards, considering I'm still relatively young age. Well, I'm planning on living till 100, so still quite young. And I think the thing I've learned about boards is that they're both incredibly important and also completely unimportant. Don't tell anybody I said that, because on one level, they don't run companies, executives do. And if we start thinking boards run companies, then we're in big trouble, in my opinion. They're there at important moments of change. They can be supportive. They need to do the governance, all those things, of course. But actually, I think it's about executive teams. And I think if the executive teams have the belief and the confidence that it's the right thing to do, then they need to do the work with the boards, normal things, talking to everybody individually, doing that big sales job in advance, all those things to make their board come along. I believe it's really important not to think that boards are a blocker, because actually boards are only a reflection of the executive team. So that's one aspect to answer your question. I think the other thing is just start testing. Don't ask for the big thing. Go with the small thing to start with and just see what happens, because I think we live in a world where we can do much more, kind of, to use a tech term, minimal viable product testing, and just do little iterations of things and roll out things as an example, and then you can show, well, look, we did that and it led to this, and so therefore we should do more of it. So always test, keep iterative, keep nimble, and don't, in my opinion, make the mistake of thinking that boards run companies.
Thank you very much, Martha. And again, people in the room are nodding at your answer. One more question, if I may, to combine 2 points. So there's one question here that's about globalization and whether when you think about how important globalization has been for entrepreneurship and company growth, and on the other hand, how challenging globalization has been when coupled with the climate emergency. What's overall your view about how we use and develop globalization, global supply chains, etc., into the future? And there's another question that people want to tag on to that, which is, where has Brexit left us in relation to globalization, and how do we make the most of the situation that we're in? 2 rather big questions, Martha.
Conveniently, I have 2 minutes to answer them in, so I will do my best. I'm going to sort of try and steer a course between both those questions. I'm not a politician, so I don't have to tread this very careful line. I was wildly anti-Brexit, and I'm not making a political point about that. I'm not going to revisit our vote. We are where we are. I do believe, however, that by not recognising what's happening in our economy now, because of it, we are in danger of not doing the right things to address it. And I think, to me, We still have so much opportunity for growth in this company, but it has to be in concert with other countries. It has to be through open trade. You know, we are living in a global digitalized economy, and that's just speeding up, not slowing down. And so we need to make sure that we've got the right trading arrangements, we've got the right relationships. And again, Siobhan and the team do an amazing job at representing the chamber and the members' voices, which I am not I don't know how to quite frame myself. I'm an open-minded person, and I think we need to have relationships with other countries. I think just as I believe in the power of the chamber network, I believe in the power of country networks. So whether that's the European Union or NATO or another alliance, I think they're fundamentally important for our growth and our trade and our resilience over the next decades. I think that unfortunately our politicians from all shades are finding it very difficult at the minute to tread a bit more openly into the light and say what is actually, I think, true to many of them, which is we're not in a very good situation right now, and we need to do some more practical things to address, which as a result of where we've ended up because of various Brexit deals. On the other side of that, at the same time, I think we need to be realistic about supply chains and the kinds of ways the world are changing and the power structures that are changing regardless of Brexit, which is sort of the first part of your question, right? You know, I'm not an expert in China, but here I am sitting in a company that does a huge amount of trade with China. I am struck all the time by the fact that 98% of the minerals we need in the European Union and Europe come from China. Now, just that's not sensible. And I think the US's massive semiconductor strategy and our small attempt at one this last week are steps in the right direction, just to rebalance where power lies and to de-risk our economy. But, you know, these are the very beginnings of very big topics, and I think we need, in my opinion, for politicians to be a bit bolder in how they address some of this stuff and not be quite so caught up in the politics of everything. And now you have to excuse me, I'm afraid I have to go back to work.
We know you do, Martha, and on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Baroness Martha Lane Fox.